in.
Step out of the vehicle right now.
Officer, I live here. This is my house.
That's where I can see him.
Reaching for my wallet. Here, federal ID. I'm Judge Elijah Carter.
Judge?
Step out. Step out of the car. You are making a mistake.
I'm recording this.
Out of the vehicle, now.
Officer.
The headlights of a silver Mercedes sedan swept across the manicured lawns of Crestwood Estates as the vehicle made its way down Thornberry Lane. It was a Thursday evening in late September, and the air carried that particular crispness that signals the transition from summer to autumn. The clock on the dashboard read 9:17 p.m. Behind the wheel sat a man who had spent the last 14 years of his life upholding the law, first as a federal prosecutor and then as a judge on the United States District Court. His name was Dr. Benjamin Carter, though in his courtroom he was known simply as Judge Carter. He was 54 years old, distinguished, meticulous, and tonight utterly exhausted. The conference in Washington had been productive, but draining. 3 days of panel discussions on judicial ethics and sentencing reform had left him intellectually stimulated but physically depleted. All he wanted now was to pull into his driveway, greet his wife Denise, pour himself a modest glass of scotch, and collapse into the familiar comfort of his own bed. The house was less than a mile away. He could already picture the warm glow of the porch light that Denise always left on for him when he traveled. Crestwood Estates was one of those neighborhoods that existed in a kind of bubble, insulated from the chaos and noise of the city proper, located on the outskirts of Millbrook, a mid-sized metropolitan area in the American heartland. It was home to doctors, lawyers, executives, and tenured professors. The houses were substantial without being ostentatious, set back from the street behind expansive front yards and carefully maintained gardens. It was the kind of place where neighbors knew each other's names but respected each other's privacy, where children rode bicycles on the sidewalks and nobody worried much about locking their doors during the day. Benjamin Carter had lived here for nearly 2 decades. He and Denise had purchased the house when their son Marcus was still in elementary school, drawn by the excellent schools and the sense of safety that permeated the community. Marcus was grown now, working as a software engineer in Seattle, but the house still felt like home. Every tree in the backyard, every crack in the driveway, every creak of the hardwood floors was intimately familiar to Benjamin. This was his sanctuary, the place where he shed the weight of the robe and became simply a husband, a father, a neighbor. He turned left onto Magnolia Court, the final stretch before home. The street was quiet at this hour, most windows dark or glowing softly with the blue flicker of television screens. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Benjamin allowed himself a small smile, almost there, and then, without warning, the world behind him exploded in red and blue. The sudden burst of emergency lights was so unexpected, so completely out of context with the peaceful suburban evening, that Benjamin's first instinct was to check his rearview mirror to see what was happening behind him. Surely there must be an emergency. Perhaps a fire truck was rushing to a nearby house, or an ambulance was responding to a medical call. He pulled his Mercedes slightly to the right, giving whatever emergency vehicle was approaching room to pass. But the lights didn't pass. They stayed fixed behind him, the unmistakable strobe pattern of a police cruiser. Benjamin's confusion deepened. He hadn't been speeding. He was certain of that. He'd been traveling at perhaps 25 miles per hour, well under the residential limit. His headlights were functioning. His registration was current. His license was valid. There was absolutely no reason for this stop. Still, he was a judge. He understood procedure. He knew that the correct response was to find a safe place to pull over, turn off the engine, and wait calmly for the officer to approach. There would be some explanation. Perhaps his brake light was out and he hadn't noticed. Perhaps the officer needed directions or was conducting some kind of neighborhood check. It would be a brief interaction, a minor inconvenience, and then he would be home. Benjamin guided his Mercedes to the curb in front of a house he recognized as belonging to the Hendersons, a retired couple who spent most of the year in Florida. He put the car in park, turned off the engine, and placed his hands on the steering wheel at the 10 and 2 positions. He had given this exact instruction to his son when Marcus first learned to drive. Keep your hands visible, make no sudden movements. Be polite but firm about your rights. He had never imagined he would need to follow his own advice quite like this. Through his side mirror, he watched the patrol car come to a stop about 15 feet behind him. The headlights and emergency lights remained on, casting harsh shadows across the peaceful street. For a long moment, nothing happened. The officer remained in the vehicle. Benjamin could see a silhouette behind the wheel, illuminated intermittently by the glow of what appeared to be a computer screen. If you find stories like this compelling, I want you to do something for me right now. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what happens next in this story is going to make you question everything you think you know about justice in America. And trust me, you're going to want to see how this ends. The seconds stretched into minutes, 2 minutes, then 3. Benjamin remained motionless, his hands still on the wheel, his mind beginning to cycle through possibilities with increasing unease. Why wasn't the officer approaching? What was happening in that patrol car? He resisted the urge to open his door or step out of the vehicle. He knew that could be interpreted as aggressive or threatening. He had read too many case files, presided over too many hearings involving police encounters gone wrong to make that mistake. At the 4-minute mark, the driver's side door of the patrol car finally opened. Benjamin watched in his mirror as a figure emerged. The officer was young. That much was immediately apparent. He moved with a kind of exaggerated swagger that Benjamin recognized from his years in the courtroom, the body language of someone trying to project authority they hadn't yet earned. As the officer approached, his flashlight beam swept across the interior of the Mercedes, momentarily blinding Benjamin before settling on his face. The young man who appeared at Benjamin's window looked to be in his late 20s at most. He had a clean-shaven face, dark hair cropped short in a military style, and eyes that seemed to be looking for something specific. His nameplate read, Mendez. His hand rested on his duty belt, close to but not touching his holstered weapon. He did not smile. License and registration, he said. Not a greeting, not an explanation, just the demand. Benjamin kept his voice calm and measured. Good evening, officer. Certainly. May I ask why I've been stopped? The question seemed to irritate the young officer. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. License and registration, he repeated, this time with a harder edge. Benjamin nodded slowly. Of course. My wallet is in my jacket pocket, and the registration is in the glove compartment. I'm going to reach for them now. He narrated his movements deliberately, a habit born from years of watching body camera footage and understanding how quickly misunderstandings could escalate. His right hand moved to his inner jacket pocket, extracting his wallet with exaggerated care. He removed his driver's license and handed it to the officer. The registration is in the glove compartment, he repeated. I'm reaching for it now. Officer Mendez took the license but barely glanced at it. His flashlight continued to probe the interior of the vehicle, sweeping across the back seat, the passenger seat, the floor mats. Is this your vehicle? He asked. Yes, it is. You live around here? Benjamin felt the first genuine flicker of unease. The question was not inherently inappropriate, but something about the officer's tone suggested it was not a routine inquiry. Yes, I do. Just up the street, actually. 742 Magnolia Court. Mendez's eyebrows rose slightly. That's an expensive neighborhood. I've lived here for 19 years, Benjamin replied evenly. The officer studied the license in his hand, then looked at Benjamin, then back at the license. There was something happening behind his eyes, some calculation or assessment that Benjamin couldn't quite read. This really your address? It is. What do you do for a living, sir? Benjamin hesitated. He had learned long ago that identifying himself as a federal judge in routine situations could create more complications than it solved. People either became excessively deferential or, occasionally, hostile. He preferred to be treated like any other citizen, but something about this encounter was already feeling wrong, and he decided that transparency was the safest approach. I'm a federal judge, he said simply. United States District Court. Officer Mendez's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. The information seemed to land wrong, as if it didn't fit into whatever narrative he had constructed in his mind. A federal judge, he repeated, his tone flat and skeptical. That's correct. You got any proof of that? Benjamin blinked. In all his years and countless interactions with law enforcement officers in professional and personal contexts, no one had ever asked him to prove his occupation. I have my court identification in my wallet, if you'd like to see it. Let's see it. Benjamin carefully extracted the identification card that granted him access to the federal courthouse. It bore his photograph, his name, and his title in clear lettering. He handed it to the officer alongside his driver's license. Mendez examined both documents, his flashlight beam flickering between them. The silence stretched for an uncomfortable length of time. When he finally spoke, his tone had not softened. "Where are you coming from tonight?" "Washington, D.C. I was attending a judicial conference." "And you're just now getting back?" "At this hour." "My flight landed at 7:45. I had to retrieve my car from long-term parking and drive home." Benjamin could feel his patience beginning to wear thin, but he kept his voice steady. "Officer, I've been very cooperative. Can you please tell me why I've been stopped?" Mendez handed back the documents, but did not answer the question. Instead, he stepped back from the vehicle and gestured with his flashlight. "I'm going to need you to step out of the car, sir." Benjamin's mind immediately began analyzing this request. He had not been told the reason for the stop. He had not been informed of any violation. He had provided valid identification that confirmed his identity and his occupation. There was no legal basis he could identify for this escalation. Yet he also knew that refusing to comply could lead to far worse outcomes. The calculus was grimly familiar to him from dozens of cases he had reviewed. Comply and complain later, or resist and risk violence. He chose to assert his rights while remaining non-threatening. "Officer, I've been fully cooperative. I've provided my license, registration, and court identification. You still haven't told me why I was stopped. I don't believe there's a legal basis for me to exit my vehicle." The words hung in the air between them. Mendez's expression hardened into something that Benjamin recognized all too well from the courtroom, the look of someone whose authority had been challenged and who intended to reassert it through force of will. "Sir, I'm giving you a lawful order. Step out of the vehicle. And I'm asking you respectfully to explain the basis for that order." What happened next would later become a focal point of the investigation, the depositions, and the federal lawsuit. Officer Mendez's hand moved to the door handle of the Mercedes and pulled it open. "I said step out. Now." Benjamin found himself facing a choice that no amount of legal expertise could make easy. He was a black man being ordered out of his car by a young white police officer who had refused to explain the reason for the stop. He knew the statistics. He had ruled on cases involving excessive force, false arrests, and civil rights violations. He understood, both intellectually and viscerally, the danger of this moment, but he also knew that his best protection lay in remaining calm, remaining compliant, and documenting everything he could. "I am stepping out under protest," he said clearly, making sure his voice would be captured by any recording device that might be active. "I do not consent to any search. I am asserting my Fourth Amendment rights." He emerged from the vehicle slowly, his hands visible at all times. The night air was cooler than he'd expected, carrying a hint of moisture that suggested rain might be coming. The street remained eerily quiet. No other cars had passed. No neighbors had emerged from their homes. It was just Benjamin and Officer Mendez, illuminated by the harsh glare of the patrol car's lights, standing on a street that Benjamin had walked thousands of times without ever feeling unsafe. "Hands on the hood," Mendez commanded. Benjamin looked at him steadily. "I am a federal judge. I have committed no crime. I have broken no law. I am standing on a public street less than 200 yards from my own home. I will not place my hands on the hood of my car." "Sir, I'm not going to tell you again." "Then arrest me and explain to your supervisor why you arrested a federal judge who was driving home from the airport without breaking a single law." The standoff might have continued indefinitely, if not for what happened next. A light came on in the house across the street, the Nguyens' place. A moment later, the front door opened, and an elderly woman appeared on the porch. Her name was Eleanor Nguyen. She was 72 years old, a retired schoolteacher, and she had known Benjamin and Denise Carter since they first moved to the neighborhood. "Benjamin," she called out, her voice carrying across the quiet street, "is everything all right out there?" The officer's head snapped toward the sound, his flashlight briefly illuminating Mrs. Nguyen's concerned face. Benjamin seized the moment. "Eleanor, I'm fine. Please stay where you are. But if you could call Denise and let her know I've been stopped by the police just up the street from our house, I would appreciate it." Mrs. Nguyen's expression shifted from concern to something harder. She had lived through the civil rights era. She had seen things in her youth that still haunted her, and she recognized immediately what was happening on her street. I'm calling right now, Benjamin, and I'm recording this on my phone. The mention of recording had an immediate effect on Officer Mendez. His posture changed, becoming slightly less aggressive, though his tone remained hostile. Ma'am, you need to go back inside. This is a police matter. I'm standing on my own property, Eleanor replied calmly. I'm not interfering with anything, and I'm not going anywhere. More lights were coming on now. The Patel's house, 2 doors down. The former residence of the Hendersons where Benjamin had parked, now apparently occupied by someone who was also peering through the blinds. The neighborhood was waking up to the drama unfolding on their quiet street, and with each new witness, Benjamin felt his position strengthening slightly. Whatever was going to happen, it would not happen in darkness. It would not happen without documentation. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text message from Denise. Eleanor called. I'm watching from the upstairs window. I'm recording. I love you. Stay calm. Let me ask you something right now. What would you do in this situation? You're a respected professional, standing in your own neighborhood, being treated like a criminal for no reason you can understand, and you know that anything you do could be used against you. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to know how you would handle this, because Judge Carter's response to what happens next reveals everything about the man he is. Benjamin drew a breath and addressed Officer Mendez with the same tone he used when ruling on contested motions. Officer, you have now had several minutes to examine my valid identification. You can see that I am who I say I am. You can see that this is my registered vehicle. You can see that I live in this neighborhood. You have still not explained why I was stopped, and you have still not articulated any reason for asking me to exit my vehicle. There are now multiple witnesses and multiple recordings of this interaction. I am asking you, one more time, what is the reason for this stop? Mendez's jaw worked silently for a moment. When he spoke, his words came out clipped and defensive. I observed your vehicle moving erratically, possible impaired driving. Benjamin almost laughed. I was driving 23 miles per hour on a residential street. I came to a complete stop at the stop sign on Thornberry Lane. I used my turn signal when I turned onto Magnolia Court. There was nothing erratic about my driving, and we both know it. Are you calling me a liar? I'm stating facts, and those facts will be easily verified by any dashboard camera footage from your patrol vehicle. Do you have your dashboard camera active, officer? Because if you do, I would very much like that footage preserved. The question seemed to catch Mendez off guard. He hesitated, and in that hesitation, Benjamin saw something that troubled him deeply. Not just the aggression of a young officer on a power trip, but something more calculated, more deliberate. This stop had not been random. This encounter was not the result of some genuine misunderstanding about erratic driving. This was something else entirely. Before either man could speak again, headlights appeared at the far end of Magnolia Court. A second patrol car, moving without emergency lights, cruised slowly toward the scene. Benjamin watched it approach with mixed emotions. Another officer could mean an escalation of the situation, 2 against 1. Or it could mean a cooler head, someone with more experience who might recognize how badly this encounter had gone wrong. The second car pulled up behind Mendez's cruiser. The door opened, and a woman emerged. She was older than Mendez by at least 15 years, with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun and a bearing that suggested years of experience. Her uniform bore sergeant's stripes. She approached the scene with a measured pace, taking in the situation. The Mercedes with its door open, Benjamin standing beside it, Mendez rigid with defensive hostility, the growing cluster of neighbors watching from their porches and windows. "What's going on here, Officer Mendez?" she asked. Her voice was calm but carried an unmistakable note of authority. Mendez straightened slightly. "Traffic stop, Sergeant. Possible impaired driving. Subject has been uncooperative." The sergeant's eyes moved to Benjamin, assessing him with a professional gaze. "Sir, may I see your identification?" Benjamin handed over his driver's license and court ID for the second time that night. The sergeant examined them carefully, her expression unreadable. When she looked up, something in her demeanor had shifted almost imperceptibly. "Judge Carter," she said, "I apologize for any inconvenience. I'm Sergeant Patricia Hawkins. Can you tell me what happened here?" Benjamin recounted the events as precisely as he could, speaking in the same measured tones he used when summarizing facts from the bench. The unexplained stop, the failure to provide a reason, the aggressive demands, the request to exit the vehicle without legal basis. As he spoke, he watched Sergeant Hawkins's face carefully. She was listening, but he couldn't tell whether she was truly hearing him or simply going through the motions of appearing concerned. When he finished, Sergeant Hawkins turned to Officer Mendez. "Officer, what was the specific reason for initiating this traffic stop?" "I already told him. Erratic driving. The vehicle was weaving." "I was not weaving," Benjamin interjected. "And I would like the dashboard camera footage preserved to verify that." Sergeant Hawkins held up a hand. "Let's everyone just take a breath here." She looked at Benjamin. "Judge Carter, I think the best thing for everyone right now is if we let you get on home. It's late. You've had a long day of travel, and this has clearly been a stressful situation. Can we agree that the stop is concluded and you're free to go?" It was a reasonable offer. It was the path of least resistance. Benjamin knew that accepting it would end the immediate confrontation and allow him to process everything that had happened in the safety of his own home. But he also knew that accepting it meant letting Mendez walk away without any real accountability. It meant another young black man, one without a judge's credentials and a neighborhood full of witnesses, might face the same treatment next week. It meant the system would continue to function exactly as it had been functioning. "Sergeant, I appreciate the offer, but I want to be clear about something. I was stopped without cause. I was treated with hostility and suspicion despite producing valid identification immediately upon request. I was ordered to exit my vehicle without any articulation of reasonable suspicion. This is not a matter that I intend to let drop. I will be filing a formal complaint with your Internal Affairs Division tomorrow morning, and I expect that all recordings from this encounter, including dash cam and body camera footage, will be preserved pursuant to departmental policy." Sergeant Hawkins nodded slowly. "That is absolutely your right, sir. I'll make sure the relevant footage is flagged for preservation." "Thank you." Benjamin turned to Officer Mendez. "I hope you think carefully about what happened here tonight, officer. The only reason this encounter didn't escalate into something worse is because I happen to have credentials that you couldn't easily dismiss and neighbors who were willing to witness and record. Most people don't have those protections. Most people are at the mercy of officers who abuse their authority. I've seen the consequences of that abuse in my courtroom. I've seen lives destroyed. I've seen families shattered. I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that what happened here tonight has consequences, not out of personal vengeance, but because it's the right thing to do." Mendez said nothing. His face was a mask of controlled resentment, but beneath that mask, Benjamin thought he detected something else. Not remorse, not understanding, fear. The fear of a young man who was beginning to realize that he had made a very serious mistake. Benjamin got back into his Mercedes, started the engine, and pulled away from the curb. In his rearview mirror, he could see Sergeant Hawkins speaking intently with Officer Mendez, their figures illuminated by the strobing lights of the patrol car. The neighbors were still watching from their porches. Eleanor and Nguyen raised a hand in a small wave as he passed. The drive to his own driveway took less than 30 seconds. It felt like hours. Denise was waiting at the front door when he pulled in. She was still in her bathrobe, her phone clutched in her hand, her face a mixture of relief and barely contained fury. She had spent 15 years as a prosecutor before retiring. She understood, perhaps better than anyone else could, exactly what her husband had just experienced. "I have the whole thing," she said as he walked up the porch steps. "From the moment Eleanor called me, every second, the audio is clear." Benjamin took his wife in his arms and held her for a long moment. The adrenaline was beginning to fade now, replaced by a bone-deep weariness that had nothing to do with his long day of travel. "I know," he said quietly. "I know you do." Inside, the house was warm and familiar. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the photographs on the walls documenting a life well lived. Benjamin moved through these spaces that he had known for nearly 2 decades, and for the first time, they felt slightly foreign. Something had shifted. Something had changed. He poured himself the scotch he had been craving and sank into his favorite armchair in the study. Denise sat across from him, her laptop already open, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she began documenting everything they knew about Officer Mendez, the Millbrook Police Department's complaint procedures, and the timeline needs to hear it. because these stories don't get told unless people like you help spread the word. And every person who hears it is one more person who might be prepared if they ever find themselves in a similar situation. Benjamin watched the press conference from his study, Denise beside him, the television screen filling with the chief's carefully chosen words. He felt a complicated mixture of emotions: satisfaction that his complaint had been taken seriously, vindication that the facts had been acknowledged, but also a deep weariness and an awareness that this was far from over. "It's a start," Denise said quietly, "but it's not enough." Benjamin nodded. "I know, Mendez is gone. That's good, but the system that created Mendez is still there. The culture that allowed him to think he could stop a black man for no reason and demand that he prove he belonged in his own neighborhood, that doesn't change because one officer gets fired. That takes something more." 2 weeks after the press conference, Benjamin and Denise, working with a team of civil rights attorneys, filed a federal lawsuit against the city of Millbrook, the Millbrook Police Department, Officer Kyle Mendez, individually, and Sergeant Patricia Hawkins, individually. The lawsuit alleged violations of the Fourth Amendment, unreasonable search and seizure, the 14th Amendment, denial of equal protection, and various state civil rights statutes. It sought compensatory damages, punitive damages, and comprehensive injunctive relief requiring systemic reforms to the department's policies and training. The filing generated another wave of media attention, but something more significant was happening beneath the surface. Other residents of Millbrook, emboldened by Benjamin's willingness to fight, began coming forward with their own stories of police misconduct. A Latino business owner who had been detained at gunpoint while opening his own store. A young black woman who had been stopped 3 times in 1 month while driving through the same intersection. An elderly Asian man who had been roughly handled during a welfare check requested by a neighbor who found his presence in the park suspicious. Each story added weight to a growing body of evidence that the problem was not limited to Officer Mendez. The problem was systemic. The problem was cultural. The problem was embedded in the very fabric of how the Millbrook Police Department operated. The city's response to the lawsuit was initially defensive. Lawyers filed motions to dismiss, argued that individual defendants were protected by qualified immunity, and challenged the standing of the civil rights organizations that had joined as interested parties. The legal maneuvering was predictable, the standard playbook for municipalities facing civil rights litigation, but the political pressure was mounting. The mayor, facing re-election the following year, began distancing herself from Chief Morrison. The city council demanded briefings on the department's practices. A local pastor organized weekly vigils outside the police department headquarters, drawing hundreds of participants. The state legislature announced hearings on police accountability statewide, with Millbrook as the primary case study. 4 months after Benjamin's traffic stop, Chief Harold Morrison announced his early retirement. The official statement cited personal reasons and a desire to spend more time with family, but everyone understood the real message. The chief had been sacrificed on the altar of political necessity. His replacement was Angela Washington, a reform-minded deputy chief from a neighboring jurisdiction who had built her reputation on community policing initiatives and transparent accountability practices. Her appointment was seen as a signal that real change might be coming. The lawsuit was settled 8 months after it was filed, under terms that Benjamin considered imperfect but meaningful. The city agreed to pay substantial damages, though the amount was less than what a jury might have awarded. More importantly, the settlement included a comprehensive consent decree negotiated with the Department of Justice that required sweeping reforms to the Millbrook Police Department's policies, training, supervision, and accountability mechanisms. The consent decree mandated implicit bias training for all officers. It required clear documentation of the basis for every traffic stop. It established an independent civilian oversight board with subpoena power. It created an early warning system to identify officers with patterns of complaints before they escalated to serious misconduct. And it required annual public reporting on key metrics related to stops, arrests, uses of force, and complaints broken down by race, ethnicity, and neighborhood. Benjamin attended the press conference announcing the settlement. He stood beside Angela Washington, the new chief, as she outlined the reforms that would reshape her department. Reporters asked him how he felt about the outcome. I feel, he said carefully, that we have taken one step forward on a journey that will require thousands more. What happened to me that September night was wrong, but I was fortunate. I had resources. I had connections. I had a neighborhood full of witnesses willing to document what they saw. Most people who experience this kind of treatment don't have those advantages. They suffer in silence. They're told they must have done something to deserve it. They're afraid that speaking out will make things worse. He paused, gathering his thoughts. The reforms we're announcing today are meaningful, but they will only matter if they're implemented with genuine commitment and monitored with rigorous oversight. I intend to remain engaged in this process, not because I want to be famous or controversial, but because I took an oath to uphold justice, and that oath doesn't end at the courthouse door. Justice is something we have to fight for every day, in every space where power has the potential to be abused. In the months that followed, Benjamin Carter became an unlikely but influential voice in the national conversation about policing and race. He testified before state legislative committees. He spoke at conferences on criminal justice reform. He wrote op-eds that were published in major newspapers. He never sought the spotlight, but he never shied away from it when it could serve the cause of accountability. Officer Kyle Mendez, meanwhile, faced consequences beyond his termination. The district attorney ultimately declined to file criminal charges, citing the difficulty of proving intent beyond a reasonable doubt. But Mendez found himself effectively blacklisted from law enforcement. His name had become too associated with the scandal. No department would take the risk of hiring him. In an interview with a local journalist conducted a year after the incident, Mendez expressed bitterness, but not remorse. "I was just doing my job," he insisted. "I saw something that didn't look right, and I investigated. That's what cops are supposed to do. Now my career is over because some judge decided to make an example out of me." The journalist asked whether he had learned anything from the experience. Mendez's response became infamous. "Yeah, I learned to be more careful about who I stop. You never know who's got connections." It was perhaps the most revealing statement he could have made. He had learned nothing about constitutional rights, nothing about implicit bias, nothing about the responsibility that comes with the power of the badge. He had only learned to be more careful about not getting caught. Eleanor Nguyen, the retired schoolteacher who had first emerged onto her porch to witness the confrontation, became an activist in her own right. At 72, she joined the newly established Civilian Oversight Board, bringing her perspective as a longtime community member and witness to the night that changed everything. She often told the story of what she had seen, of the federal judge standing on the street with his hands visible while a young officer treated him like a suspect. "I thought those days were behind us," she would say. "I thought my generation had fought those battles so the next generations wouldn't have to. I was wrong, but I'll tell you something else I was wrong about. I thought I was too old to make a difference. Turns out, you're never too old to stand up and be counted." The Patels, the Hendersons' new neighbors who had also witnessed the incident, became regular attendees at community meetings on police-community relations. They brought their teenage children, wanting them to understand that civic engagement was not optional, that the freedoms they enjoyed had to be defended and protected. The other victims who came forward after Benjamin's case went public found varying degrees of resolution. Some received settlements from the city. Others had their cases dismissed on technical grounds. A few were still fighting their way through the courts years later, but all of them said the same thing. They were grateful that someone with Benjamin's standing had been willing to fight. It gave them permission to believe that their own stories mattered. Benjamin returned to his courtroom and his regular duties, though something had shifted in how he approached his work. He found himself more attentive to cases involving police conduct, more skeptical of law enforcement testimony, more aware of the small ways that bias could infect the system at every level. He didn't become an activist from the bench. That would have been inappropriate. But he became more vigilant, more conscious of the weight of his decisions on the lives of the people who came before him. Denise continued to support him, as she always had. She turned down offers to return to prosecution, instead volunteering with legal aid organizations that helped people who couldn't afford lawyers navigate the civil rights complaint process. She often said that the night of September 24th had reminded her why she went to law school in the first place. Not for the salary or the prestige, but to make a difference in people's lives. Their son Marcus flew in from Seattle several times during the ordeal, offering support and technical expertise in organizing the documentary evidence. He had his own experiences with being stopped while black, incidents he had never fully shared with his parents before. The family had long, difficult conversations about race, risk, and the responsibilities of privilege. One evening, about a year after the incident, Benjamin sat in his study watching the sunset through the window. Denise entered with 2 glasses of wine and settled into the chair across from him. "You're thinking about it again," she observed. He nodded slowly. "I keep wondering what would have happened if Eleanor hadn't come outside, if the neighbors hadn't started recording, if Sergeant Hawkins hadn't shown up when she did, if Mendez had been just a little more aggressive, or if I had said the wrong thing at the wrong moment. But that's not what happened. No. But it could have. And for so many people, it does. That's what I can't stop thinking about. I got lucky. I shouldn't have had to be lucky. I should have been able to drive home from the airport without being treated like a criminal. But I got lucky anyway, and I can't shake the feeling that I have a responsibility to use that luck for something meaningful." Denise reached across and took his hand. "You are using it. You've done more in the past year than most people do in a lifetime. The consent decree, the oversight board, the reforms, those don't happen without you. They don't happen without all of us. The neighbors who witnessed, the journalists who covered the story, the activists who organized, the lawyers who fought the case. This was never about one person. It was about a community refusing to accept injustice." He paused, looking out at the fading light. "That's what gives me hope. Not that I did something brave or important, but that when it mattered, people showed up. They stood on their porches with their phones. They called each other. They demanded accountability. They refused to look away. That's how change happens. Not through heroes, but through communities that decide they've had enough." The sun had set now, leaving the sky in shades of purple and orange. Benjamin finished his wine and rose from his chair. Tomorrow there would be more work to do, more cases to hear, more battles to fight. The struggle for justice was never finished, only continued. But tonight, for this one moment, he allowed himself to feel something like peace. He was home. He was safe. He was surrounded by people who loved him. And he had used the power he had to make things a little bit better for the people who would come after him. That was enough. That had to be enough. So here's my final question to you. We've spent the last hour together, walking through every moment of this story. We've seen how a routine drive home became a nightmare. We've seen how privilege and prejudice collided on a quiet suburban street. We've seen how one man's refusal to stay silent sparked a movement for change. And we've seen how the system slowly and imperfectly began to respond. What do you take away from all of this? Do you believe that justice was served? Do you think the reforms will make a lasting difference? And what would you do if you found yourself in Benjamin Carter's shoes, standing on a street in your own neighborhood, being asked to prove that you belong? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story meant something to you, if it made you think about the world we live in and the world we want to create, then do me a favor, subscribe to this channel, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, because stories like this matter, and the more people who hear them, the harder it becomes for injustice to hide in the shadows. This has been a story about power, about prejudice, and about the possibility of change. Thank you for being here until the end. I'll see you in the next one.